What do a Civil War general, a desert fox, and a US president who led the D-Day invasion all have in common? Grant, Rommel, and Eisenhower were all outright obsessed with one man. They pored over his battle maps, they dissected his decisions, and they modeled their own command on his principles. That man was Napoleon Bonaparte. But here's the question that perhaps they themselves stayed up at night asking. What was the specific, repeatable genius in his tactics that transcended time and technology? What could a 19th century commander possibly teach us in the age of tanks and bombers? The answer lies not in a single battle, but in 5 breathtaking moves that redefine the art of war itself. And the first one on our list isn't where you think it is. It starts not with a grand victory, but with a desperate, starving army on the brink of collapse. So, that desperate, starving army? We'll get to that. Because before he could save an army, he had to save a republic and invent his first rule of winning. Napoleon's legend begins not with a grand army, but with sheer, brutal opportunism. Picture this. Paris in chaos. A royalist mob, supporters of the fallen monarchy, is storming the capital. The general in charge is paralyzed, but a young, broke, and completely unknown artillery captain on leave, Napoleon Bonaparte, sees not chaos, but a chance. With cold precision, he seizes cannons and fires a whiff of grape shot into the crowd. It's a brutal act that saves the revolutionary government, but that was just the audition. His first true masterpiece of tactics came months later, at the port of Toulon. The city had been handed to the British. A massive Allied fleet filled the harbor. The French army was besieging it, and failing miserably. Their commanders were stuck in the old way of thinking, attack the strongest walls. But Captain Bonaparte saw what they were all blind to. He told them, "To take Toulon, you must make the British fleet leave, and to do that, you take this." He pointed to a single, lightly defended fort the British had foolishly ignored. They called it the Little Gibraltar, but to Napoleon it was the Little Key, and he knew it unlocked the entire city. He led a ferocious assault, was wounded by a bayonet, but fought until the fort was his. The moment the French flag was raised, the British admirals looked at their charts in horror. Their anchorage was now under direct French artillery fire. The entire fleet evacuated in a panic that very night. Toulon fell, and a 24-year-old Napoleon was promoted to brigadier general. This is move number 5. Not for its scale, but for its mindset. Identify the one critical point, the linchpin that everyone else ignores, and smash it with everything you have. It's a lesson he would use again and again. But this creates a problem. What happens when the enemy learns? When they start guarding all their little keys? A genius doesn't just find a key. He makes the entire lock obsolete. And, for that, he invented move number 4, a move so deceptive it would become his signature. So, how do you follow an act of pure, ruthless logic with an act of even purer deception? By 1805, Napoleon is emperor. The empires of Austria and Russia have united to crush him. They have a larger, more professional army, and they are confident. Crucially, they believe they have learned his lessons. They know he seeks a decisive battle, so they carefully avoid one, waiting for reinforcements. Napoleon's solution? He doesn't just find a key, he forges a trapdoor right under their feet. To lure them in, he performs a masterpiece of theater. He deliberately abandons the strongest piece of ground on the entire battlefield, the Pratzen Heights. He presents his army as weak, overextended, and vulnerable. The crowning touch? He sends a personal envoy to the Allied headquarters to beg for an armistice, playing the part of a frightened, cornered man. The Allied commanders, Tsar Alexander and Emperor Francis, take the bait completely. They see a chance to cut the retreating French army in half and win the war in a single day. As the sun rises on December 2nd, they order their main force off the high ground, abandoning the vital heights. And this is the moment Napoleon had been waiting for. He had hidden the bulk of his corps in the low ground, shrouded by a thick morning fog. He turns to his marshals and says, "One sharp blow and the war is over." As the Allies commit, Marshal Soult's IV Corps emerges from the mist like a phantom army and storms the now undefended heights. They don't just take the high ground, they split the Allied army in two. The battle is over almost as soon as it begins. A total, catastrophic defeat. This is move number 4, the grand deception. Win in the enemy's mind first, and they will march into the trap you've built from their own arrogance. Austerlitz was his masterpiece, but deception requires a willing enemy. What do you do when faced with an opponent who cannot be tricked, when you are surrounded, outnumbered 2-1, and facing annihilation not through cleverness, but through sheer, overwhelming force? That is when logic and deception fail. That is when you have to reinvent the very engine of war itself. That is move number 3. So deception has shattered an empire, but now in 1807 Napoleon faces the Russians again. But this time, they've learned. They won't be tricked by another Austerlitz. At Friedland, the Russian army, under General Bennigsen, is massive, disciplined, and crucially, it has caught a portion of Napoleon's army isolated, with its back to a river. It's the perfect trap. For hours, the French fight a desperate holding action, containing the Russian advance across a narrow stream. The situation is precarious. A conventional general would throw his infantry into a meat grinder to hold the line. But Napoleon, receiving reports, does not see a crisis. He sees a perfect frozen moment in time. The entire Russian army is slowly, inexorably funneling itself into a cramped pocket of land, with a river at its back and only a few flimsy bridges for escape. And in that moment, he makes a decision that will redefine the role of firepower on the battlefield. He doesn't just order his artillery to support the infantry. He creates history's first dedicated grand battery. He orders a staggering 70 cannons, a force of firepower never before concentrated in one place, to be massed on a single rise overlooking the Russian left flank. Imagine the sight. The sun is setting, and as the Russian columns push forward, they are suddenly eclipsed not by soldiers, but by a wall of iron and smoke. For over an hour, this concentrated hellfire rakes the compressed Russian lines. Cannonballs don't just hit men, they tear through entire formations. The orderly advance disintegrates into a panicked, chaotic mob with nowhere to run. The river at their back, once a defensive anchor, becomes a death trap. Men drown by the thousands trying to flee. This is move number 3, the concentration of decisive force. It's the moment artillery stopped being a supporting instrument and became the lead conductor of the symphony of destruction. It wasn't a new technology, it was a new way of thinking, a brutal, mathematical equation applied to the chaos of war. Friedland wasn't just a victory, it was an annihilation. But even this terrifying application of force has its limits. Because what do you do when the entire continent unites against you? When you are surrounded on all sides by enemies who have finally, truly, learned to fear you? That is when a commander must reach into his soul and pull off not just a victory, but a perfect, flawless work of art. That is move number 2. So how do you defeat an army without even fighting a major battle? That is the question Napoleon faced in 1805. The Austrian general Mack, with a formidable army of 70,000 men, was dug in at Ulm, awaiting the arrival of his Russian allies. A direct assault would be bloody and slow, giving the Russians time to arrive and crush the French between two massive armies. Every other general in Europe would have seen a siege, a stalemate. Napoleon saw a loophole in the very fabric of the map. Instead of attacking Mack head-on, he performed what historians would later call a strategic envelopment on a scale never before imagined. He abandoned his own supply lines and launched his entire army, every single corps, on a lightning-fast 200-mile march around Mack's flank. Think about that for a second. He didn't just outmaneuver the enemy. He made his entire army disappear from Mack's perception. For 2 weeks, the Grande Armée was a ghost, moving with breathtaking speed and discipline. Mack, sitting comfortably in Ulm, first received reports of French troops to his west, then to his north, then finally to his east. The reality dawned on him with soul-crushing horror. Napoleon wasn't in front of him. Napoleon was everywhere around him. The French had miraculously marched all the way around and were now positioned between Ulm and Vienna, between Mack and his reinforcements, between Mack and his home. They had completely cut him off. No battle was ever joined. Trapped, surrounded, and with his men's morale shattered by this strategic sorcery, General Mack had no choice. His entire 70,000-man army surrendered. Napoleon had achieved the ultimate victory, a campaign won not by the bullet, but by the boot. He destroyed a nation's primary military force, with barely a shot fired. This is move number 2, the pinnacle of perfection, because it demonstrates a general so far ahead of his time. He could conquer an enemy by sheer intellectual supremacy alone. It is perhaps the single greatest operational maneuver in military history. But this leads to the ultimate terrifying question. If this flawless, bloodless victory is only number 2, what tactical move could possibly be more legendary, more audacious, more genius than the perfect campaign? What could possibly be number 1? The answer lies in a move so risky, so arrogant, that it defies all military logic. A move where Napoleon gambled his entire empire on a single, desperate afternoon. So what could possibly top perfection? A victory snatched from the jaws of certain defeat. For our number 1 move, we travel to Marengo in 1800. Napoleon, as first consul, is not yet emperor. His political hold on France is terrifyingly fragile. A single military defeat wouldn't just be a setback. It would mean the end of his career, the collapse of the French Republic, and likely his own death. He is trapped in Italy, and the Austrian general Melas launches a surprise attack with a superior force. The Austrians smash through the French lines. By 3 p.m., the battle is lost. French divisions are in full retreat. Messengers are already riding to Vienna and Paris to announce Napoleon's catastrophic defeat and the collapse of his regime. This is the moment. With his army disintegrating, Napoleon does not plan a retreat. He performs one final desperate act. He commits his entire fragile reserve, a single division under General Desai, in a last suicidal counterattack, to buy time, famously telling him, "Go, and if you can, come back." It's not a plan, it's a prayer. But as Desai's men march into the inferno, they do something incredible. They stand. They hold the Austrian advance in a bloody, point-blank firefight that chews up the attacking columns. In that moment of brutal stalemate, a young, aggressive General Kellerman, son of the legendary Valmy commander, sees a fleeting opportunity. Without orders, he leads a small force of heavy cavalry in a desperate charge directly into the flank of the now stalled Austrian advance. The Austrians, believing they have already won, are completely unprepared. Kellerman's charge hits them like a thunderclap. Caught between Desai's anvil and Kellerman's hammer, the localized Austrian victory turns into a panicked rout. By nightfall, a certain Austrian victory has become a stunning French triumph. So why is this? A battle nearly lost by a mistake and saved by a subordinate's initiative. Our number 1 move. Because it represents the ultimate tactical principle that underpinned all of Napoleon's genius. Audacity. The unwavering will to win, even when all logic says you are defeated. The psychological courage to stare into the abyss and refuse to blink. At Ulm, he won with his mind. At Austerlitz, he won with a lie. At Friedland, he won with a hammer. But at Marengo, he won with his soul. He gambled everything, including his own destiny, on the belief that a single, decisive act could reverse the irreversible. And he was right. Marengo didn't just win a battle, it made him the unchallenged master of France and set the stage for an empire. It was the ultimate gambit, and it proved the ultimate principle that logic, deception, and even perfection have their limits. But audacity is forever.